September 26th, one last quiet night in Austin, Texas. A 12-year-old girl gives her dad a birthday present, a watch she saved up to get repaired. He carries her to bed. The house is quiet, the neighborhood is still, and somewhere out there, on the other side of the planet, a fungus has already set the end of the world into motion. Humanity just doesn't know it yet. But we do. So today, we're going to go through the entire collapse day by day, year by year, and we're going to figure out when you had to move if you wanted the best shot at surviving what came next. Because in this world, the difference between life and death wasn't how strong you were or how many weapons you had. It was whether you read the right headline on the right day and made the hardest decision of your life before anyone else ever realized they needed to. And I just want to say The Last of Us has one of the best beginnings to a zombie outbreak ever put into a video game or TV series. So I'm pumped to break this one down. And if you're not familiar with the game or the TV show, don't you worry about it. We'll be covering everything as we go. Alright, let's jump into it. So before we get into the timeline, we need to talk about what makes the outbreak different from anything else in the genre, because that changes the entire survival dynamic. In Raccoon City, the outbreak was local. If you escaped the blast radius, you were out. 28 days later, Britain fell, but the rest of the world was watching from the outside. Both of those outbreaks had a border you could cross to reach safety. The Last of Us doesn't give you that option, because the infection was already inside the food supply before anyone knew it existed. In the game, the cordyceps fungus mutated on crops in South America. We're talking about mold growth on grain and flour that got packed, shipped, and distributed across the continent through normal supply chains. By the time the FDA started issuing recalls, the products were already on shelves, already inside pantries, and already eaten. The TV show traces the origin to a flour factory in Jakarta instead, but the mechanism is the same. Contaminated ingredients shipped globally before anyone understood what they were dealing with. And in the TV timeline especially, once this hits the local food supply, you're looking at a collapse window measured in days, not weeks. You can quarantine a city, you can block a bridge, and you can set up a quarantine perimeter, but you can't recall something people already ate for breakfast 3 days ago. By the time the first person turned, millions had already consumed the thing that was going to turn them too. On top of that, cordyceps isn't a virus. You can't develop a vaccine for it. You can't treat it with antibiotics, and nothing works on a fungal infection that's already taken root inside a human brain. In the game, 20 years pass and nobody comes close to a cure. So here's what you're dealing with. A global infection that entered the food supply before it was detected. Within months, 60% of humanity was either dead or infected. With those odds, the natural question is what leaving even means in a world where the outbreak is already everywhere. And that's where this video works differently than my Raccoon City breakdown. Because in Raccoon City, if you got out, you escaped the city and the outbreak with it. But in The Last of Us, you can't escape the outbreak, because it's already everywhere. But what you can do is get out of a bad situation before the roads choke, the cities turn, and the military starts making your choices for you. The earlier you move, the better your odds of choosing where you end up, what systems you're trapped under, and what kind of world you'll end up trying to survive in once everything gets worse. That's what this video is really about. It's about whether you moved early enough to choose your position before the collapse chose it for you. Alright, so your first escape window opens on the days before September 26th, and it's the best one you'll ever get. But at this point, almost nobody would recognize it for what it was. In the game, a newspaper in Joel's bathroom reports a 300% spike in hospital admissions from a mysterious infection. It says that the FDA is expanding its list of contaminated crops, with recalls already underway. The people who felt sick were flooding the emergency rooms thinking they had the flu or food poisoning, not realizing they were actually carrying something that was about to rewrite the entire world. If you connected the dots between the crop recall and hospital spikes in the same week, you could have left. The roads were still clear, there were no military checkpoints, and the city wasn't on fire yet. You could have loaded your car, driven into rural country, and put serious distance between you and the nearest population center. But even that came with a trap hiding in plain sight. If the food supply was already contaminated, then taking your pantry with you could get you killed just as easily as staying put. Because bread, cereal, crackers, pancake mix, and flour could be the thing that turns your escape into a death sentence halfway down the highway. But let's be realistic. Who reads an article about contaminated flour and thinks, I need to leave the state right now? Nobody, that's who. The information was there, but the urgency wasn't. The world still looked normal, the grocery stores were all still open, and your neighbors were still outside mowing their lawns. Absolutely nothing was out of the ordinary. This unfortunately was your best window, and it's completely invisible to almost everybody. And I should clarify that leaving during this window doesn't mean you're safe. We already covered why nobody escapes this outbreak. Not fully at least. But it does mean you're away from population centers when shit hits the fan. You're not competing with 100,000 other people for a single exit route. and you're not standing in line at a quarantine zone hoping Fedra doesn't decide you're also expendable. It means you still have time to be selective about what comes with you, because in this outbreak, the wrong food in your backseat can be just as dangerous as the wrong person. So if you did manage to make it through this window, you've bought yourself one of the most important things in this world: time. Now we're in the prologue. This is where the window starts slamming shut. In the game, it's late at night. Joel comes home from work, Sarah gives him the watch, they joke around. It's his birthday, everything feels ordinary, which is exactly why almost nobody would have left yet. Sarah falls asleep on the couch and Joel carries her to bed. But his brother Tommy has been calling all night. 8 missed calls and texts saying, "Where the hell are you? Call me." The HBO show expands on this by giving Sarah the entire day. She visits a watch repair shop where the family has mysteriously disappeared. She then spends the afternoon with her elderly neighbor who starts to act erratic. On her way back home, military jets scream overhead. Things seem slightly off, but not quite off enough to make you want to run. This is the last window where leaving still feels like an overreaction. If you got in your car right now, the roads would be busy but passable. You'd feel paranoid doing it, but you'd probably be alive tomorrow. Now that's what happens in the TV show. Hours later in the game, Sarah wakes up to a dark house. The TV cuts to an explosion mid-broadcast. Joel comes through a sliding door and tells Sarah to stay away from the doors. The neighbor Jimmy Cooper has gotten sick. Jimmy slams through the glass back door and charges. Joel shoots him. In the show, this plays out with the elderly neighbor instead. Different details, same gut punch. Tommy tells Joel to get in the truck. They hop in and they drive. At this point, you're not leaving early anymore. That train has left the station. You're now reacting to a collapse that has already started, but staying in motion is still better than being trapped where you are. Now, if you waited this long to leave, you're already behind. The calm window is gone, and every mile after this is just damage control. As they go, they pass Tommy's friend's farm completely engulfed in flames. A little further down the road, a family is standing on the shoulder begging for help. Joel tells Tommy to keep on driving. Tommy hesitates, but he listens. That moment right there is one that would stay with you. Joel made a choice: leave a family behind or save his own. If you were put in this situation, these are choices you would also have to make in real life. And out of curiosity, let me know in the comments, would you help that family or would you just keep on going? What's your game plan there? So they reach the highway and it's gridlocked. A man from a nearby car gets out to complain, and something lunges from the bushes and mauls him. And this is something I bring up a lot on this channel when I talk about gridlock traffic. Once everybody decides to leave at the same time, the highway turns into a choke point, and if you're in an active outbreak, then it turns into a feeding ground. So you either beat the traffic, or you better already be in a place with food, water, defensible ground, and enough distance from a city to avoid the surge. But you can't have everything, so hopefully you have some of those things. Anyway, so they turn back to the city, which is now a complete free-for-all. And then a speeding car T-bones their truck at an intersection. Sarah's leg is injured, Joel picks her up, and they run on foot. Tommy splits off to hold the infected back. And then Joel reaches the edge of the city, still carrying Sarah. A soldier is waiting. He radios in for orders. The response comes back. The soldier raises his weapon and he fires. Sarah takes the bullets. Tommy arrives just in time to kill the soldier, but not in time to save her. At this point, the question isn't where you should go anymore. That choice is already long gone. This is the moment the entire franchise is built on. By the time the military is locking down the perimeter, they are no longer trying to rescue stragglers. They're sealing the zone by killing anyone caught outside the approved flow, infected or not. That means the escape route was never an escape route, it was actually a kill zone. So Joel got out of Austin, but he lost the only person who mattered to him. And this is what late movement might look like in a real collapse. By the time the perimeter goes up, the state isn't trying to save everyone still outside of it. It's trying to stop the situation from spreading. So depending on the type of outbreak, that very well could make you expendable. So you survived the first night, now what? Fedra seizes control of the United States. The Constitution is suspended, martial law is declared, and the military herds civilians into quarantine zones in major cities like Boston, Pittsburgh, Seattle, Salt Lake City, and Hartford. These zones are walled off, governed by military law, which meant curfews, mandatory checkpoints, and a ration card system that controlled every meal you ate. At this point, you're facing the biggest decision since the night of the outbreak. Do you go inside the walls, or do you stay out? The quarantine zone is the obvious play for most people. There's food, structure, and protection from the infected. And for the first few years, it worked well enough to look like the right bet. But there are some pretty big trade-offs once you step inside. Your food comes from Fedra, your movement's controlled by Fedra, your safety depends on Fedra holding the line, and if the system starts to fail, you're trapped inside it with everyone else. And they will not hesitate to put you down. They already execute people in plain sight. Fortunately, if you don't go into the QZ, there is another path. When Fedra evacuated Lincoln, Massachusetts, Lincoln Massive Two Shits. Anyway, a man named Bill hid. I'm not saying Bill hid like he's hiding. His name is Bill Hid. Actually, in the TV show, he did hide, because he hid waiting for the military to leave. So technically speaking, Bill hid. After that, he spent the next 20 years turning the town into a fortress. He lined the perimeter with traps, stockpiled everything from food and weapons to fuel and generators, and built a life completely off Fedra's grid. Now this is a path a lot of people would want to take, but not everybody would have the skills to do so. That being said, in the game, Bill had a partner named Frank, but Frank grew deeply frustrated with Bill's extreme, isolated survival mindset, and he wanted something more meaningful out of life, more than just lasting one more day. So he tried to leave, but he got bitten, and he eventually hanged himself. Their story unfolds a lot different in the TV show, but both versions point to the same thing. Living outside the quarantine zone could keep you alive, but it still came with isolation, strain, and a life most people were simply not built for. For the average person, the QZ was the only realistic option, but Bill proves that surviving outside the quarantine zones was possible, and Jackson proves what the best version of that location actually looks like. Joel's brother Tommy ends up in a geographically isolated community with walls, patrols, farmland, and hydroelectric power, not just hiding from the collapse, but living far enough ahead of it to build something that could still function after the supply chain died. That's the gold standard. Now, no matter which path you choose, the clock doesn't stop. Every year you spend in the world is another year removed from one last good window you had to leave. If you chose the quarantine zone, the rations start running thin. Fedra becomes increasingly brutal, and a resistance group called the Fireflies starts waging an insurgency. One by one, the zones collapse. 20 years after the Outbreak Day, most zones have fallen. So if you bet on the QZ keeping you safe, your bet expired years ago. This is what happens when you miss every early window. You end up dependent on something that was never built to last, and when it falls apart, you're starting from zero in a world that's 20 years more dangerous than the one you could have prepared for. And if you took Bill's route, the threat outside your walls has been evolving the entire time. Within days of infection, you get runners that are aggressive, recognizably human, and terrifying, but fightable. Within weeks, stalkers emerge. These ones are smarter and quieter, the kind that crouch in dark rooms and wait for you to walk past. After about a year, clickers show up, completely blind, navigating by echolocation, strong enough to kill an armed adult in seconds. And if an infected survives for years, you get bloaters. They're massive, armored, and in hardened fungus, nearly impossible to bring down. On top of all that, the game adds spores. When an infected dies, the fungus keeps growing and fills the enclosed spaces with airborne clouds that infect you the moment you breathe them in. That's why survivors like Joel keep a gas mask ready whenever they have to move through an enclosed space. The TV show replaced spores with cordyceps networks, a fungal root system underground that links infected across huge distances and turns them into a connected organism. Step on the wrong patch of fungus, and you could wake up the infected far beyond your sight line. That being said, the people who left in Phase 1 gave themselves the best chance to get established before clickers, spores, collapsing QZs, and faction wars turned the world into something even worse. They moved while roads were still open, while supply still existed, and choices still meant something. But no matter which path you chose, the world kept on closing in. The people who left early and positioned themselves well had the best shot, but even they were playing a long game against a threat that never stopped getting worse. 20 years after the Outbreak Day, there's no safe option left. There are only degrees of survival. Essentially, the earlier you moved, the more choices you had. If you left before September 26th, you've got clear roads, a functioning world, and you pick where to land. Leave that evening and you're out, but you're scrambling. Leave late that night and you're driving past people begging for help. Miss that window, and you're either inside a quarantine zone that's going to collapse, or outside one facing an infected threat that evolves every year into something worse. In The Last of Us, the question isn't whether you can leave the end of the world behind, because you can't. The question is when you had to move, before your choices narrowed to nothing but panic, checkpoints, and systems that were already dying. And when it comes to a zombie apocalypse or any kind of end-of-world scenario, choices are the only currency that matter. The Last of Us is an Outbreak story, but the infection was never really the point. The thing that makes this franchise stay with people all these years later is what survival cost the people who actually survived. Joel got out of Austin, but he lost Sarah in the process. And for the next 20 years, he wore that broken watch, the birthday present she gave him on the last normal night of his life. The watch itself didn't matter anymore, but he wore it because it was the last thing she touched before the world ended. He drove past that family on the road. He told Tommy to keep going. It's also one of the decisions that helped turn him into the cold, detached smuggler we meet 20 years later in Boston. A man who won't let himself care about anyone because the last person he cared about bled out in his arms. As for everybody else, the people who waited for certainty lost the ability to choose. Once the roads locked up, the military moved in, and the food supply had already done its damage, survival stopped being a plan and turned into whatever scraps of control you had left. Alright guys, if you made it to the end, I appreciate that as always, and if you enjoyed this new format, I've got a playlist here of a lot more just like it, or YouTube thinks you like this video. Either way, check one of them out. Cheers.